Ojai, I believe that HIV does not exist. I believe that there are several factors that break down the immune system. For over 20 years of fighting the AIDS establishment in Nigeria, I've come to realize that greed and corruption are at the highest level, even in the government, propels all of them. That the media unwittingly have connived with them to terrorize the people. I give out $50,000 to any wonderful virologist who will prove the existence of HIV according to the original papers by Gallo and Professor Montagnier. You mentioned Kerry Mullis. He made that statement. Here's another statement he made. Quote, "It is not even probable, let alone scientifically proven, that HIV causes AIDS. If there is evidence that HIV causes AIDS, there should be scientific documents which either singularly or collectively demonstrate that fact, at least with a high level of probability. There are no such documents. Years from now, people will find our acceptance of the HIV theory of AIDS as silly as can be." People keep asking me, you mean you don't believe HIV causes AIDS? And I say, whether I believe it or not is irrelevant. I have no scientific evidence for it. I might believe in God, and He could have told me in a dream that HIV causes AIDS, but I wouldn't stand up in front of a group of scientists and say, I believe HIV causes AIDS because God told me. I'd say I have papers here in hand and experiments that have been done that I can demonstrate to others. It's not what somebody believes, it's experimental proof that counts, and those guys don't have that, unquote. Now, to wrap up our group here, our press conference on AIDS, Minette Loudon, would you read from some of those papers as well?
I have the same copies. I think we covered most of them, but there may be a couple here. Okay, Dr. Lynn Margulis, discoverer of the symbiotic origins of the cell. She's also a member of the National Academy of Science. She wrote in 2007, quote, "From my readings, discussions with knowledgeable scientists close to the story, I simply conclude, as does Kerry Mullis, the Nobel Prize laureate who wrote a foreword to Duisberg's classical work, that there is no evidence that HIV causes AIDS." Let's see, we have Dr. Charles L. Gooshector, PhD, 3-time Fulbright Scholar, Professor of African History, California State University, served as an advisor to the U.S. State Department and several African governments. Quote, "The scientific data do not support the view that what is being called AIDS in Africa has a viral cause. The scandal is that long-standing ailments that are largely the product of poverty are being blamed on a sexually transmitted virus. With missionary-like zeal, but without evidence, condom manufacturers and AIDS fundraisers attribute those symptoms to an African sexual culture. Traditional public health approaches, clean water and improved sanitation, above all, can tackle the underlying health problems in Africa. They must not be sexy, but they will save lives, and they will surely stop terrorizing an entire continent. You're looking at what I think is going to turn out to be one of the great frauds of the late 20th century." And I have a last one by Dr. Heinz Ludwig, professor of molecular biology and virology, Max Planck Institute for Biochemistry in Germany. Quote, "HIV cannot be responsible for AIDS. After 3 years of intensive critical studies of the relevant scientific literature, as an experienced virologist and molecular biologist, I came to the following surprising conclusion. There is actually no single scientifically really convincing evidence for the existence of HIV. Not even once has such a retrovirus been isolated and purified by the methods of classical virology."
Before we end, I'd like to also acknowledge the good work of Celia Farber. She is one of the few ethical journalists on the topic of AIDS, and she's here. We have people all over the world watching this press conference. My hope is for the following. We are not taking on the entire AIDS establishment. That would be counterproductive and would lead nowhere. We're not going to stand outside and yell back and forth with the AIDS activists who believe and are true believers in the HIV equals AIDS equals death hypothesis. Instead, we are asking responsible and reasonable people to contact the editors of Science magazine and simply ask them to examine objectively, critically, and fairly the documents this multi-award-winning 40-year journalist with an outstanding, impeccable reputation that has never been besmirched and never discredited, who has documents that no one else has revealed that show that there was an alteration from the original work of Dr. Popovic, who was the head of Gallo's research lab at the National Cancer Institute, that they had not discovered an HIV virus as the cause of AIDS, and they had no proof whatsoever that it infected T cells, and they did not have any evidence that the photograph taken at the time by the director of the electron microscope division of the National Cancer Institute could prove that HIV was there. We photographed it. So all the basis upon which the entire AIDS community has been working must now be brought into a corrective position. Give Dr. Gallo, as would be fair and ethical, an opportunity to respond. But we have spent a great deal of time and energy examining the documents. These are documents that Congressman Dingell did not see. It is my belief that had Dingell's committee, which was looking into whether or not Gallo had taken the Pasteur Institute's culture that they sent to the Gallo laboratory, and Gallo allegedly used that for his own, if they would have had these documents, I believe that there would be an entirely different outcome to the issue of Gallo and scientific misconduct that was alleged against him. If these editors are of men and women of high character, if they truly believe that good quality science, not political science, not economic science, but honest, applied, and basic science should be what is respected, then I believe that they will convene a committee, they will make it transparent, the people that they will convene will have nothing to do with the AIDS community at all, and that they will allow an opportunity for Janine Roberts or any of the scientists that we have quoted, and thousands more of the greatest scientists on earth, the greatest scientists that no one knows exist, to come forward and present evidence. That is my hope. I would hope that the people in this audience, and we're now being watched in 140 countries, that you will contact the editors of Science magazine and ask them, will you entertain an editorial, guest editorial from Janine Roberts? I believe that that is crucial. We will provide the editors-in-chief, the managing editor, anyone they choose at Science magazine, with copious documentation, meticulous research, and also the names and contact numbers of at least 2,000 scientists who they would be honored under any normal circumstance to publish their articles. And now reevaluate this. On the other hand, if they continue to deny the validity of these documents, then it is my thought that there will be massive litigation, class action lawsuits against all the people involved, and knowing of a problem and not resolving it is not in the American tradition. If nothing else, when we are forced to face an issue and acknowledge that we have made a mistake and correct that mistake, then let the entire scientific community, well-intentioned, ethical and honest people who simply believed in what they were doing without challenging for the proof of it, then we will change direction and turn this entire thing around. At the very least, someone's going to have to apologize and make amends to the hundreds of thousands of people who were injured or killed because of the diagnosing and treatment that was not in their best interest. I want to thank you very much for coming. The documents are now on GaryNull.com. Use them as you wish.